Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive. I am now live, I think, on the YouTube, and I've just had a few little technical hitches, trying a slightly different approach to things with the streaming software today. And today's live stream is all about some problems that seem to be surfacing with the US empire. I've talked about this on the channel before. The difficulty for the whole world with the evident fall from grace of the US superpower status, its empire status, its relative power to the rest of the world. Power is just distributed so much more broadly around the world today. But many of the people who've grown up and built their careers and led their lives in the era of US dominance of the world are having a bit of trouble coming to terms with this change in perspective. I think I've spoken before about how Elbridge Colby has talked about this, and we've seen the comments from President Biden, from Lindsey Graham, all the others, the sort of unshakable belief in US exceptionalism, in American supremacy. And there have been some recent examples, including in Australia. And finally, on the YouTube channel, I'm talking about Australia on my YouTube channel, on the Burning Archive YouTube channel. Not talking about other places in the world, but talking a bit about Australia. There have been a very troubling, I think, statement from a very senior former defence official or security official, Michael Pezullo, and he has more or less called on Australian officials, Australian citizens, Australian elites to engage in an epic contest with China. And I've just written an article in johnmenadue.com, Pearls and Irritations, and I've got a link in the video below. And I see that Warwick Powell has very kindly and gracefully said that the essay in the description is a beautifully crafted demolition of empire, conceit, delusion, and hubris. Must read. Thank you very much, Warwick. I'm really, really pleased. And I've got to say, I'm very grateful and honoured to all those who've liked and shared the work. I've had some really kind comments from Cameron Leckie. Thank you so much, Cameron, and also from many people on Twitter. I was honoured that the great Australian journalist Mary Kostakidis shared out the essay, and I do hope this helps broaden out the readership for this essay. And I do write my essays in a particular way, which is pretty heavy on illusion and all that sort of stuff, because I sort of write it for the joy of writing it as much as anything. And so what I thought I'd do today is just talk a bit more. I sort of read the essay to you, to those who haven't read it, or those who just prefer to get their sort of intellectual content through video rather than reading lots and lots and lots of different internet sites. But read it, but also explain some of the background. And one of the key pieces of background to it was these sort of shrieks coming from various representatives of the sort of US empire, US defense establishment in recent times about the risks of the fall of US primacy and the ongoing determination to actually fight a war with China, of all things, which would just be utterly catastrophic, certainly for Australia and certainly for the world. Absolutely something that should not be wished on the world. But you look through the American media, the American Twitter, American YouTube, there are people everywhere who seem in elite circles, in popular circles, populist circles, who seem determined to fight China only for one reason, which is that America stays number one. And that's really not a good enough reason to justify the devastation of the world. And I think Warwick Powell also has said in recent times that NATO seems to be determined to go down this path of becoming not the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, not a defensive alliance preventing the Soviet Union attacking Western Europe, but a global crusading army all around the world, a crusading army for the liberal rules-based order. And I think that many people, including Warwick, think that that would be a very, very dangerous thing for the world. And I think what this essay is really sort of trying to highlight is there's some common, really bad ideas about history which underpin some of these ideas, some of these American supremacist ideas, and some really bad ideas about the history of Eurasia, that vast continent, I guess, that extends from the West European peninsula, from Lisbon, all the way to the coasts of the West Pacific, even potentially, you could say, down to the southeast archipelago of Eurasia, which is Australia. So let me just share with you then a couple of the other, before we get into Michael Pezullo in my essay, a couple of the other shrieks of the US empire that I have noticed in recent days. So we have, here we go. Let me share this one with you. So this is the, I don't know, British man about town, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. I think he's a former tank officer in the British Army, but now he writes lurid opinion pieces in the Telegraph, which, and I'm not going to go into this one, but this one fundamentally advocates attacking Russia's nuclear defenses because, you know, they're weak, and it's a Potemkin nuclear defense, and that Ukraine can take it out for good. He's essentially advocating a first strike nuclear attack on the largest nuclear power in the world. It's astonishingly irresponsible. And then let's have a look at another little shriek of empire. What do we have here? We've got a much more interesting one, I think, which comes from Niall Ferguson, the historian. Now, Niall Ferguson's written a piece in, I think it's called The Free Press, which is a new publication. And Niall Ferguson is, I think, a genuinely interesting historian, although he often does, I guess, represent the interests of oligarchs and empire. But here he is saying that he has argued for some time that, you know, the world is in a new Cold War, a Cold War primarily between the United States and China. And in this piece, he argues that on this occasion, the power that resembles the crumbling, failing, collapsing, ideologically sclerotic empire, the Soviet Union in the early 1980s, is not the Russians, not the Chinese. It is the United States of America. It's a really interesting piece, and I think I will probably do another piece on it, either on Substack or on YouTube. But it is, it is a case of a sort of a shriek of empire, a real concern that the wheels are falling off US interests. But it was this piece here from none other than Michael Pezullo in the, well, I guess notorious is not too strong a word to use about the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, in their sort of magazine, The Strategist, article from Michael Pezullo called "The Challenge of Communist China," which really provoked me to write this essay that I've just done in johnmenergy.com. And he and I'm not going to go into detail about Michael Pezullo's piece, but I think what I should do is just explain a little bit more about Michael Pezullo and exactly who he is and why this piece of warmongering, because effectively I would say it is warmongering. The first line of my my article in johnmenergy.com is Michael Pezullo's war cry to challenge of communist China is a dangerous pose. It's a really dangerous thing that such a former senior security official should engage in this kind of rhetoric. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a quick sip of tea here. And now, most of my viewers do not live in Australia. It might be a bit different for this video, given I'm talking about an Australian figure, and there's an Australian figure who's been pretty controversial in recent times in Australia on the thumbnail of the video. But most of my audience probably have not heard of Michael Pezullo, but he is similar to many people that you would know from the American or British or European security defense establishment. Very, very senior official who, had his time in office and sort of has moved out and is now sort of occupying this sort of midway zone between not really being in government, but still trying to influence the decisions of government, the big strategic issues of foreign policy and defence strategy, and doing so through, positions and speeches or whatever at think tanks and that kind of thing. In America, there's a plague of these kind of former generals, former diplomats, so-called diplomats, former, White House senior advisors, former White House, like just spin doctors who comment on foreign affairs and constantly needle and push the government towards positions that they favour. It's almost like a kind of a parastate outside of the state. And Michael Pezullo seems to have taken up a bit of a leadership role in the anti-China faction within Australia, if I could put it in such crude terms, in advocating a continual hardening of Australia's position towards China. Now, he really came to fame, I guess, 5 or so years, or I think in the about 2013 or so. I think he was a key figure in putting together the kind of stop the boats type immigration controls that were in Australia. And he's a not atypical figure within the bureaucracy. There's often very cliched images of what senior bureaucrats are like, that they're pen pushers and they have no strategic vision, they have no charismatic personality. They don't pursue energetic arguments and whatnot. They aren't necessarily the strategists of the government. In fact, there's often a very complex relationship between senior officials and politicians, and I guess key people in the media and in that sort of think tank community. And I think Michael Pezullo, although I haven't met him personally, is probably typical of a kind of fairly aggressive, fairly charismatic senior official who has sort of made a career almost on demonstrating that he's prepared to take the tough line and do whatever it takes. And he got into a little bit of trouble. I think there was a major sort of integrity inquiry into Michael Pezullo about the extent to which he was prepared to do things, kind of whatever it takes, and perhaps confusing his personal beliefs, his personal interests even, and his ideological commitments with the good government of the country. And I suspect what's happened here is he's taken that mode of operating, that fairly aggressive mode of operating, out into the semi-government sector of the think tank world, and he's penned this war cry to force Australia to harden its attitude towards China. He's published it on the eve of the visit of, I think it's the Premier of China, to Australia. And while the current government, which has got rid of Michael Pezullo, he's no longer an actual functioning, a serving official. The current government is trying to mend fences a little bit, at least, with China. Michael Pezullo instead has taken very much the hard line. And I have not been following the sort of domestic Australian political debate terribly much, but I did notice, I think it was last weekend, that Cameron Leckie, the excellent commentator on defence, peace, military, war type issues, geopolitics issues in Australia, Cameron Leckie tweeted out that this piece by Michael Pezullo was at least, it was worrying that he's calling for this conflict with China, but at least it's honest, because at the heart of the piece is this desire to control Eurasia. It's the same old American geostrategy. So I think that's probably all you probably need to know about the background to Michael Pezullo. But and without going into the detailed content of what he had to say, there were a couple of things that really got under my skin in his particular comments. So let me just show one of those to you now. Where are we? Here we go. So, yes, this is the main one, really, that really got under my goat. Okay, so here he says that, earlier on in the piece, he was saying how, you got to think historically about the challenge of China. You need a big world history kind of point of view. But in reality, he wasn't. I mean, he provided a bit of a a brief account of the hardening of the Australian government's position towards China diplomatically over the last, 15 to 20 years. But the actual history in it was really, really dreadful. And it just really annoyed me that this kind of irresponsible war rhetoric was being justified in terms of, visionary thinking about world history. And here he says, and hopefully you can read that, but he says the China challenge cannot be managed effectively by diplomats, for whom concepts such as diplomatic resets, thaws in relations, or stabilization are preferred. These are cyclical notions. Now, this again is this kind of aggressive, tough guy, hard man, ruthless perceiver of the realities of, global strategic politics. That there are a surprisingly large number of people within the bureaucracy who do that, and although their sort of opinions are never actually tested and debated and criticised in public, they often in the closed corridors can seem very impressive because, there's a lot of testosterone, there's a lot of aggression in politics, and sometimes the people who seem like the guerrillas are the ones who seem who appeal to political leaders as the people who can really make things happen, who will, force the hands of others. And you get the same rhetoric here. That's why he's critical of the diplomats. He's saying we've got to have the tough guys in charge. But then he says we've got to understand the fundamentally new historical circumstances. And here he says, for the first time in 500 years, the West is being challenged by a Eurasian land power in China, which also possesses significant and growing sea power. Blah, 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 blah. And so he says the China challenge has to be seen in these world historical terms. So effectively in this piece, I said, okay, Michael Pezullo, let's see how convincing that argument really is if we do look at it in world historical terms. So let me read then the piece. What I'm going to try to do here is do a bit like what Brian Valetic does occasionally on the New Atlas, which is read a piece that he's published and just add in a few explanatory points along the way. And hopefully, my hope is just to get this to a broader audience. And with a piece like this, you kind of need to keep it to 1,000 words. So there's often a lot of compression and a lot of maybe assumed knowledge, perhaps, in the article that it might help some viewers just to sort of spell out. And I'll just bring up the article for you on the screen. Here we are. I've got to give a shout out to the editorial and production team at johnmenadue.com, Aaron and John and all the others. And thank you for doing such a wonderful job with my pieces, and a superb piece of sub-editing and whatnot. They've put across the US empire, deranged, shrieks, drown out, talk of peace, which is sort of a line from the piece, which is a much more compelling headline than what I had in my original piece. Okay, let's just make this a little bit bigger for you, and I think you can see that all okay now. Yes, okay. And again, they've just in the italics, they've just summarized it up the top there, but I'll just read it for you. So Michael Pezullo's war cry, The Challenge of Communist China, that's the piece we've just been talking about, is a dangerous pose to straddle world history and a sign the USA's geostrategy is violently deranged. He pronounced, and this is the key line, perhaps the concluding line even of his piece, that, or the start line perhaps of his piece, is he pronounced that dealing with a belligerent communist China is the geopolitical challenge of the age, with twisted Cold War rhetoric. And, you know, he's evoking Caspar Weinberger, he's evoking Ronald Reagan and, all the sort of evils of the Soviet Union, all that sort of stuff. With twisted Cold War rhetoric, Pezullo urged any remaining followers, which is a little bit of a dig at Pezullo's fall from grace in the bureaucracy, to fight an epic contest with China, with victory as the goal. They were Pezullo's words, an epic contest with China, with victory as the goal. Why can't we just get along, folks? Really? The world's big enough to share, surely. But not in Michael Pezullo's eyes. When I was a bureaucrat and heard leaders declare victory to be the goal, I knew they had lost their way. They had sacrificed practical reason for the prestige of primacy. So it is with Pezullo, and so it is with the United States of America. The goal has not become something meaningful to the people of America. It has not become something meaningful to the people of Australia or the people of the world. It hasn't become like achieving, say, sustainable development goals or, I don't know, securing an end to nuclear weapons, something like that. It's become making sure that, you know, America remains number one on our watch. And certainly in my experience in the bureaucracy, that is the sure sign that whatever, and it's probably been your experience in life too, when people have lost track of what they're doing something for and are just keeping on doing it in order to win at what they're doing. It's a sure sign that the motivation's lost, the capabilities lost, the reasoning behind why they're doing the thing that they're doing has been lost. They have become more focused on the prestige of primacy than the practical reason of defining meaningful goals of getting along with other nations and, you know, pursuing a shared path of development, cooperation, and difference within the world. Okay, let me continue with the article. Pezullo is not an American. Oh, excellent quote from Reese there, Reese Jarrett. Thanks, Reese Jarrett. Good to hear from you. Good to have another Aussie online. Yeah, absolutely. That's also one of the key quotes from Michael Pezullo's comment, essay or article that symbolized the kind of Cold War rhetoric. Exactly. It refers to the heartland again, and we'll be coming to Mackinder's theories of the heartland shortly. So Pezullo is not an American, but he served the empire with undiplomatic zeal. And of course, this is an allusion here, the undiplomatic zeal, because the great French diplomat Talleyrand, who was who was, you know, powerful figure in France before the French Revolution, during the Revolution, and after the Revolution, was the diplomat for Napoleon and also for the Congress of Vienna after Napoleon. He was once asked, what is the key quality that a good diplomat needs? and he said, an absence of zeal. So Pezullo is not an American, but he served the empire with undiplomatic zeal in the semi-autonomous Indo-Pacific province, the former British colonies of Australia. Now, this was a bit of a flourish on my part, but how much does the Australian government really exercise genuine sovereign autonomy in the world today? So I thought I'd just play around with not even giving Australia its official title of the Commonwealth of Australia, but just to refer to it as a semi-autonomous province of the American Empire in the Pacific Ocean, Indo-Pacific Oceans, indeed. His war cry follows his fall from grace, but it repeats loyally the mantras of American geostrategy and its obsession to control the world by controlling Eurasia. Pezullo's war cry pivoted on a grand historical claim. He wrote, for the first time in 500 years, the West is being challenged by a Eurasian land power in China, which also possesses significant and growing sea power. This was not seen in Imperial Germany, that is, Germany between 1871 and 1918, Nazi Germany, or the Soviet Union. And then I say, with this woeful history, the disgraced Homeland Chief, that's Pezullo, because he has been disgraced. He used to be the head of the sort of Homeland Security Department, or whatever it was called in the Australian government, urged the West to defend US primacy. This is the issue that's dividing and concerning the world today, really, how to respond to the collapse of US primacy. Do we try to put it back, or do we try to move on to the new world that has formed in the ruins of US primacy? The Soviet Union, I say, would be surprised to learn it had no navy and that air power did not matter. In fact, the kind of quality of geostrategy is hearkening from Pezullo, is really hearkening back to Mahan and Mackinder, and we'll get to that shortly. He seems to have forgotten that the world has, missiles, new surveillance systems, air power, etc., have changed the nature of military matters. The leaders of Imperial and Nazi Germany would be shocked to know they were not of the West. After all, Spengler wrote about Germany and Western Europe, not the USA, in the decline of the West amidst World War I. 100 years before, and I'm engaging in just a little bit of historical conceit here, and I could have made this section longer, but I sort of exercised a little bit of self-control. But you notice, Pezullo talks about 500 years, but all three of his cases are just the standard Anglo-American villains of the last 100 years. Germany caused World War I, Germany caused World War II, the Soviet Union was the evil empire. 100 years before, Tsar Alexander I of the Eurasian Russian Empire might have thought he challenged the West after marching to Paris to liberate Europe from Napoleon. It was Russia as much as, Wellington and all that sort of stuff who defeated Napoleon in Europe. Napoleon marched to Moscow. Tsar Alexander and his armies repelled France out of Russia, and then out of Central Europe, and then out of Western Europe, and marched all the way to Paris. And then the British helped mop up things at Waterloo. And there's a great book by Dominique Levin, I think it's called Russia Against Napoleon, which is the true story of how Russia defeated France in the 1812 to 1814 war. 500 years ago, the US-led west of Pezullo's strategic imagination did not exist. Amerigo Vespucci's name had not yet been conferred on the continents of the New World. Amerigo Vespucci was the explorer, I guess, whose name in 1532 was given, about 10 years after his death, was given to the two continents of the New World, the North and South America. And in my interview with Felipe Fernandez Amesto, who wrote a biography of Amerigo Vespucci and several other of the explorers and a history of America from the sort of Spanish point of view or Hispanic point of view, he informed me that Amerigo Vespucci's early career was as a pimp. So, and you can find that video, that interview on the channel. It's really well worth watching. Excuse me. Spain under Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, operated a global monarchy stretching across Europe from Lisbon to Prague. Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. He controlled the Netherlands. He controlled the area which we now think of as Czechoslovakia. He controlled many of the Germanic states. He wasn't just Spain as we think of it today. Stretching across Europe from Lisbon to Prague and on to the Americas and the Philippines a bit later in the 16th century. But Spain chose not to fight a doomed contest with China, but rather trade in silver, which of course they largely mined from South America. So there we go. What is really this West? The actual facts of history, however, would spoil Pezullo's grandiose strategy. He is striking a pose of command at world history, not seeking to understand it. His pretense to think historically conceals the complex, blood-soaked history of European and American colonialism in Eurasia, which is what is really being challenged after 500 years. Now, of course, one could go into a lot more detail about that blood-soaked history of European and American colonialism in Eurasia. It has also included Russian colonialism in Eurasia, of course, as well, but that is also a very complicated story because the Russian state has been formed by the back and forth of, Mongols, Russians, and the many, many ethnic groups who operate across the territory of Asia. But one only has to think of India. One only has to think of the history of China in the 19th century. The follies in Afghanistan of the British in the 19th century, the disasters of the British and subsequently the Americans in the Middle East or in West Asia in the 19th and 20th centuries to justify all of that. Pezullo is reanimating the undying world historical idea of Anglo-American geopolitics. Halford Mackinder's heartland theory, exactly as Rhys Jarrett says in the comments. This is just warmed over Mackinderism yet again from the the grand world historical thinker of Australia. He who controls the heartland, and as I have explained in one or two videos on Halford Mackinder, the heartland Mackinder's statement was he who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland. And by the heartland, you can tell from his map and by the rhetoric and the explicit statements of his essays, he means Russia. He who controls the heartland controls the world island Eurasia. He who controls the world island controls the world. And there I sort of summarize actually what I've said in a couple of videos, that Mackinder believed he knew the laws of history and geography and could guide the British and USA empires to rule the world. The father of geopolitics is still taught in US diplomacy schools and military colleges and was enshrined in US defense strategy during the Reagan administration, but the theory was never based on history. This heartland theory that someone who controls the Eastern Europe controls the heartland and controls the world island and then controls the world has never been tested as an actual empirical proposition. It's more a imperialist fantasy, a grand sort of, a grand strategist fantasy than anything. No single power has ever controlled Eurasia, with the arguable exception of the Mongol Empire and the successor horde states, which I discuss with Marie Favreau in another great interview with a historian, which you can find on the channel. Of course, many have tried. Mackinder was one, but his ideas were based on racialist contempt of the Asiatic horde and a paranoid belief the Trans-Siberian Railway would undercut British shipping interests. He completely misread world history and misled a century of Anglo-American geostrategists. And if you think I'm overcooking it, let me assure you, if you listen to my reading of Halford Mackinder's famous Geographical Pivot of History from 1904 on the channel, you will see those things are absolutely true. The best world histories show that no power has controlled Eurasia since the Mongols. The plurality of cultures, geography, and power has defied dreams of dominion. They show the many challenges to Western power in Eurasia and how illusory the unipolar moment was. Now, I'll just emphasize here that discussion is in part based on this wonderful book that I've frequently recommended on the channel and, in other settings as well, which is by John Darwin, the great British historian of empires. After Tamerlane, The Rise and Fall of Global Empires, 1400 to 2000. Tamerlane was the kind of late Mongol, Timurid, Central Asian sort of leader in the tradition of Genghis Khan, who, established a pretty large Central Asian empire post-Mongols, but ultimately he failed in about 1405, and Darwin's history is absolutely essential reading if you really want to understand Eurasia. There is so much rubbish talked about Eurasia in geopolitics. There's so much rubbish talked about the rise and fall of empires in geopolitics. Pretty strong statement, I guess, but I really recommend people read this. And I'm thinking of actually doing a little course where I actually take people through this book as well to really understand the rise and fall of empires, and doing a few more videos on it as well. So let us know in a comment either now or subsequently if that would be of interest to you. All right, let's go back to the article, because at this point I sort of pivot away from Michael Pezullo in the article towards a coincidental statement that came out on the same day, 14th of June, as Pezullo's discussion. Okay, so here we read, hang on, there we go. Coincidentally, on the same day, Aspie published Pezullo's Battle Hymn of the Empire. Of course, I think there is a famous American song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. A major speech on security arrangements in Eurasia was delivered by Vladimir Putin, President of Russia. The heartland of Eurasia, that Mikhail Brzezinski, that's Zbigniew Brzezinski, the intellectual giant who dominated American foreign policy and hostility towards the authoritarian regime of the Soviet Union, and then subsequently the desire to break up Russia from the 1950s to the 2000s. Zbigniew Brzezinski, author of The Grand Chessboard, where he conceived Eurasia as a chessboard on which, American geostrategists played their games, that Mikhail Brzezinski and Joe Biden dreamed of looting. The speech stated a diplomatic objective, which, unlike Pezullo's goal of victory, harkening back to the early statement where I said that once you see a purposeless goal just to win, you know that there's that a group is lost. Would achieve tangible aims for the global majority in its struggle with the West. And here I quote from the speech, which hasn't been all that widely reported. It has certainly been widely discussed, rightfully so, in the more sort of independent media. But there's a very critical, this is the speech in which Vladimir Putin set out conditions for peace negotiations, to start peace negotiations, as I think George Samueli and Peter Lavelle on the Gaggle have very sensibly set out. They're not conditions for the end of the peace, they're the conditions that are start of the negotiations to end the conflict. He said this thing, which was more of a long-term goal, something recognised that would take quite a long time. And Putin said, the time has come to start a broad discussion of a new system of bilateral and multilateral guarantees of collective security in Eurasia. At the same time, it is necessary in the long term to gradually phase out the military presence of external powers in the Eurasian region. Now, I haven't seen many people really fully comment on the implications of this, but that's what I comment on in the next paragraph. The stated goal is to expel the US military from Eurasia, east, south, north, and west. No more Ivy League elites playing chess games, referring back to Brzezinski's, grand chessboard strategy idea, playing chess games in Eurasia and fighting endless wars over there so we don't have to fight them over here. No more US nuclear weapons menacing the Neva, the river in St. Petersburg. American occupation of Europe would finally end. Its diplomats' complicity in war crimes in West Asia would stop. No more bases encircling China. American troops would, after 80 years, leave the West Pacific from Japan, Korea to Taiwan, the Philippines, and even the semi-autonomous Indo-Pacific province I call home. I think this is very significant, and a lot of people have, I think, brought this back to the long-argued Russian position for collective security in Europe. But this is much bigger, and anyone in Australia knows that the American security umbrella dominates the West Pacific. It surrounds China. So to call for the phasing out of the military presence of external powers in the Eurasian region very much brings up the question of US bases in Korea, US bases in Japan, US presence in Taiwan, and all the rest of it. It brings together, I guess, the Russia conflict and the China conflict in a joint goal of saying, America, it's been a long time now since you occupied these regions after World War I. It's time maybe to give up your remote control of the Eurasian continent and let us look after our own security. Putin's speech, I write, is not a call for an epic contest, but a plea to cooperate in peace. But it will only be realised if grand strategists of the US and its allies abandon their Mackinder manuals to control Eurasia. Now, it's not my place to be arguing for Vladimir Putin's position. All I'm saying is, wow, the largest country in the world that occupies a very large share of Eurasia, together with its ally China, or near ally China, has said the US troops go home. What are we going to do there? What are we going to do there? He's not saying, US troops, we're going to kill you and get you out, epic contest. But he's saying, let's negotiate a collective security agreement to phase out the presence of external powers in the Eurasian region. Doubtless, Putin and Xi discussed this goal when they met in Beijing. At their media conference, China delivered a pointed message to the European Union that it should get along with its neighbour Russia and stop serving America. And I addressed this, I think, in one of my earlier videos, the one about the hug between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, and where I emphasised that and I sort of took some of this out to keep within the word limit, but at that media conference, they talked about 5 principles of a new order, and they talked about how Russia and China presented a new model of great power relations with neighbours. Very much, it seemed to me, that their direct, the audience they wanted to get to was the European Union. The European Union is a neighbour of a great power, Russia, and it has not at all been trying to get along with that power. It could try to establish more neighbourly relations rather than seek to break it up. There are hints that a few Europeans may have got the hint. There are whispers of strategic autonomy in European civilization and mockery of the disoriented leer at the G7 and D-Day Many of us would have seen the pictures of Georgia Maloney gracefully covering for Joe Biden wandering off during various G7 events, and there were even more troubling scenes at D-Day. But across the US empire, shrieks like Pezullo's drown out these whispers. Historically ignorant strategists who pose as tough guys urge people to their deaths to sustain the illusion of American primacy. Their berserker cries are taking the world to the brink of nuclear war. Will they risk it all to fight a war on all fronts, all for the goal of victory? I wake each morning in fear of this American Lear's rage against the storm. I guess everyone knows the story of Lear, the mad king whose daughter, who seeks the praise of his daughters. And then when one of them says, all I can offer you is my love, I can't, kill the lily anymore, he goes into a rage and disowns her and ultimately ends up mad in a storm. Quite mad. So is that the state of the American empire today? All I can offer to resist are these weak words. I hope they persuade at least one suborned Australian official to pursue a definable goal of peace, the withdrawal of the USA from Eurasia and its littoral, all the coasts and the islands off the coast of Eurasia, part of the Eurasian region, from Lisbon to Sydney. Now, of course, in the 1980s, 1990s, Gorbachev and many European leaders used to talk about a integrated Eurasian zone from Lisbon to Vladivostok. I wonder whether we need a new set of collective security arrangements without the presence, or with a much more limited and phased out presence of the US military all the way from Lisbon to Sydney, or even, let's say, down to Melbourne, where I live. And I think that would be beneficial to the world, and it would probably even be beneficial to the United States. What is the moral case for the United States still to have 800 military bases all around the world, and to have all those soldiers, all those weapons, all that effort deployed to command Eurasia in the vain, ridiculous goal of controlling the world? The problem, I conclude, echoing Pezullo's comment, mirroring his comment, but changing it about a belligerent China, the problem of dealing with a belligerent, crumbling, supremacist United States of America is the geopolitical challenge of the age. There you go, folks. I'm going to stop sharing there and say, look, I'd be really interested in what people had to say about the article and the ideas in the article. Maybe no sort of trolls and, accusations of being propagandists and puppets and all that sort of thing. But I'd really be interested to see what people think, and for people to actually engage with this very significant issue, or two significant issues, really. The really, really bad understanding of Eurasia and, grand historical strategy that has poisoned, in my opinion, has poisoned Anglo-American strategy for at least a century, all based on Mackinder's Heartland Theory. And secondly, what is the prospect? How can the people of the world achieve some genuine collective security in Eurasia without the presence of US soldiers in 800 bases around the world? I've been going for a good hour. I think that's probably enough. Thanks for those of you who joined me live, and I'd love to hear your comments on the piece. It will be really, really, really interesting. Haven't decided what I'm going to do next week's video on, but I think I may well do it on. I was just reading Emmanuel Todd's La Défaite de l'Occident this morning, and he has a very important chapter there about what is the West, and I might have a little discussion about that in next week's show. And also do make sure you check out all my other videos, including my sort of series on the Nobel Prize for Literature. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, where I write a sort of a weekly essay on, well, at the moment I'm doing a weekend series on the Nobel Prize for Literature because, my God, there's so much bad news in geopolitics at the moment. I've decided that one has to have a bit of a immersion in the culture, the cultural history of the multipolar world, and in a way looking at every single one of the winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature is a very interesting way of actually getting both the story of the geopolitics of the world since 1901, but also the cultural history of the world since 1901. And but I also write a weekly essay there on Wednesdays. And in today's essay on Wednesday, which comes out at sort of 6:30 p.m. Australian time, I am concluding my series on a brief history of the multipolar world, looking at the period from 1908 to 1922. So hope you can check out those things. Thanks so much for joining me. And please leave me a comment because I do love to respond to all comments. And thanks to Ready by Candle and by Mahout1329. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And I'll see you again soon. Once I find out how to stop.